Electricity supply is considered as one of the major impetus for development. A nation that cannot generate enough electricity to power its industries will remain at the doldrums of underdevelopment. Successive governments in Nigeria over the years have been experimenting with various policy options on how to improve the power sector. However, they failed to make the necessary investments in the sector. Much of what obtains are observed are high energy losses, both technical and non-technical. Inadequate expertise, high operating costs, more than 80% goes into staff salaries and welfare. Analysts estimated that the federal government will need on a yearly basis $70 billion to improve the generation and transmission capacity of the country. This kind of investment could not be sustained by the government. Hence, the need for the involvement of the private sector in the development of the power sector in Nigeria. It was on this basis that privatization was conceived. Privatization was seen by many as the main solution to all the challenges encountered in the power sector. Now, previous attempts by making the sector more efficient and effective had failed. A major reason attributed for this failure was the attempt still gave governments the majority stakes in the sector. To remedy the situation, it has been argued that total divestiture of government from public enterprises involved in generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity will lead to proper utilization of resources and better performance. Let's move forward and put this into proper perspective. I have joining me via Skype from Abuja. He is the special advisor to the president on infrastructure, Ahmed Zakari. Ahmed, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Tolu.
Yeah, Ahmed, I want to start like this. Pre-privatization, there were a lot of expectations for the power sector. By this time, we thought we're going to be doing about maybe 15,000 megawatts or close to 20,000 megawatts. But as of today, we're still doing less than 5,000 megawatts. And we continue to hear the distribution side holding their ground, transmission side maintaining a different position. Why do we still over around with this kind of supply for 200 million people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And anytime we want to solve problems, we need to look at where we went wrong in the past. So if you think about the sector, what I tell people is it's somewhat of a jigsaw puzzle that we have not been able to put all the pieces together yet. Prior to the privatization, government was struggling to invest. We thought that working through a privatization, it would drive investment, and we've not gotten all of the policies correct over time, and we find ourselves where we are. But what I will say is investment in this sector actually has just been misaligned. So for instance, if you think way back, maybe as of 99, we may have had an installed capacity of 3 to 4 workable gigawatts of power. Over time, the NIPP investments were done. We added 5 gigawatts. We privatized, the hydro dams. We've seen increasing capacity there, Ughelli and others, up to the point that from 3 to 4 gigawatts, we then had an installed capacity of 15 gigawatts plus. But what we did not do at the same time was invest in our transmission. This administration has come in, and with the great work of the Ministry of Power and the TCN, have actually worked with a number of donor agencies to raise up to about $1.6 billion of financing to go on the transmission side. And many of those projects are ongoing, but you can imagine there's a delayed impact of the improvement. Now, we all have recognized that we're struggling in the distribution sector, and that is where all the thrust and focus of the administration is now, to see how we can make those distribution companies more solvent, how we can improve investment into them, and see that finally this jigsaw puzzle and the misaligned investment, we can align them because the goal should be, let us make sure that if we can generate 15 gigawatts, we can transmit that and distribute that, and then build on that to the 30, 40, 50 gigawatts that Nigeria, as an industrialized, growing economy, needs to have.
Interestingly, it all overs around investment one way or the other. Now, how well would you say the private intervention that we've had from the discourse in particular, how well have they invested in the sector to get better? Some are saying they are not investing so much, but they keep talking about a cost reflective tariff, which Nigerians really don't want to hear about until there's better supply.
That's a great question. So what I would say is we are where we are. Finger pointing and blame games will not get us to the promised land. We as a country, investors, government, we all need to work together. There's been this prevailing argument that on one side, we're not allowing the tariff, we being government, to be cost reflective. On the other side, Nigerians are saying we'd like to see better power and investment for us to pay cost reflective tariffs. And I think a case in point, if you look at the tariff order that NERC issued on the 31st, they came back and said overwhelmingly through the engagements they had with Nigerians on the tariff order, Nigerians have said they are willing to pay for power, but it has to be available. So what has NERC come up with now? If you go and read the tariff order from the 31st in detail, what we've said is DISCOs can define their network into service level areas. Let them go and agree with consumers about how much service they can provide, so a service reflective tariff. If the consumers agree, then we will make sure that they provide, if they say 23 hours, let's make sure they're providing 23 hours, and then let them agree what they'll charge the consumers, that is, they being the DISCOs. With that model, through this new tariff order, we believe is more equitable. It aligns with the aspirations of Nigerians that are saying we'll pay for power, but let it be available. And we've made requirements, the regulator announced that, you have to meter consumers and provide them energy before you start talking about increasing power supply. But I think this balance of regulator will not prevent you from negotiating with the consumers as the DISCO, but at the same time, you have to provide the adequate service for them, is a game changer. And that will encourage investment into the sector. If you come to my neighborhood and you tell me you have to pay a little bit extra for power, but I'll make it available, I'm sure most Nigerians will do that. If you see with many of the mini grids, even in places like Torankawa, in Sokoto, right, that the Ministry of Power have done a mini grid, they're paying above the tariffs that some of us pay here in Abuja, but those people are paying because the power is available. So I think this balanced approach that NERC has taken with the recent tariff order, we think aligns with the aspirations of the DISCOs on cost reflectivity, but it also aligns with the aspirations of Nigerians that you have to provide service before I agree to pay you my fees.
Ahmed, let me take you on this. I know Nigerians would like to get clarity on this issue. 2 months free electricity for Nigerians, particularly at this time where everybody expects support from the government. The discourse are saying there's going to be a modality to go about this. Can you shed more light on what this means?
Yeah, I think there's been quite a bit of confusion and I'd say miscommunication around this topic. First and foremost, I think all of the government, President Muhammadu Buhari, as you know, always wants us to focus as a government on things that will impact the people's lives, especially those that are less well off in our society. Engineer Saleh Mamman, looking at this, worked with NERC and, within the government space, and there was a delay of 3 months for any tariff increase. Now, if you understand how our tariffs have worked. Currently, Nigerians only pay for about half the cost of the electricity they consume. The other half is borne by the government. So you can imagine if we're extending by 3 months any tariff increase, government is bearing all of that cost. That was a big palliative measure that the power minister, announced, or communicated in terms of what NERC did. Now, in terms of the 2 month free electricity, as of April 10th, the Power Ministry clarified that no decision had been taken on it yet. I would like us to leverage that communication officially from the Power Ministry that there has been no decision on it. What I would say is we have a very intelligent group of leaders in Senator Ahmed Lawan and Femi Baja Biamila, Honorable the Speaker, and they're asking the right questions, which is, in this difficult time, how can we help Nigerians? And this free electricity concept is something that was touted, and is being discussed. What I would say is that the government will make sure, in partnership with the National Assembly, that anything that we do actually impacts the right set of people. If you imagine today, 60% of the energy consumed in Nigeria is enjoyed by the top 20% of the population. So you can surmise that if you provide free electricity for 2 months, 60% of that benefit, if you do it in an unstructured manner, will go to the richest 20% of Nigerians. That is contrary to the objectives that the National Assembly, in terms of this palliative measure, want to do, and is contrary to the administration's position on catering for the poor. So the current discussions are around how do you intelligently design any intervention in the power sector to make sure it impacts the poor people, the people that it should get to. I would also mention that on the Engineer Saleh Mohammed, the Minister of Power's emergency measures press release on the 31st of March, he expressed that despite the fact that we're struggling, the poor people and the area that Rural Electrification Agency is working on, currently we think about 80 million Nigerians have no access to power. Any intervention we want to do is to go take solar home systems, solar off-grid solutions, mini grids, and put money in those areas that actually target the poor. So, in summary, what I'm saying is there will continue to be palliative measures in the sector for Nigerians. We are working with the National Assembly to intelligently design those initiatives to reach the poor, including some of the work that REA, the Ministry of Power through REA, is working on off-grid solutions that really provide power to that 80 million Nigerians that don't have power.
Indeed, I'm happy that you touched on the rural electrification. I wanted to talk about that, and I like that clarity you also made with regards to that. Let's talk a little bit on infrastructure now and the budget and investment in times of economic challenges as we face COVID-19 and what we battle at the moment as a country. And now you're the special advisor on infrastructure, special assistant, yes, to the president on infrastructure. What do you expect moving on, even post-COVID-19?
So this has been a government of infrastructure, and that's why, having the great opportunity to work as the special advisor to the president on infrastructure is something that, is a great opportunity. What the president has said is, as we work through managing and adjusting our budget, there's two line items that he wants to make sure we protect. One is programs for the poor and any infrastructure related items that cater for the poor. So you think, like we mentioned, Rural Electrification Agency and some of their funding, as well as healthcare for primary healthcare and other areas that are infrastructure that impact the poor. The second thing that the president asked that be protected in the revised budget is major critical infrastructure projects. right? That if we stop them now, they will have a serious impact on the economy later on. So I would say, obviously, with today oil prices below $30 is a difficult time. The government is working on many palliative measures. You heard about the CBN intervention for small and medium enterprises. The executive is working with the National Assembly on this 500 billion naira COVID-19 fund. Recently, His Excellency the Vice President was directed by the President to lead an economic sustainability committee that has been focusing on jobs and catalyzing the private sector to really work in this environment. So I would say that it is a difficult time, but the President's directions have been very clear. Protect line items related to the poor, work on critical infrastructure, partner with the private sector to catalyze the economy. And we continue to pray that the oil price will react to this reduction of 10 million barrels per day by OPEC that was announced this week, or I say late last week, and we hope that these measures will allow us to have a slimmer budget, which we need to do, but let it be focused and protect the population and the citizens that need protection.
In 60 seconds, looking at your background, engineering, oil and gas, infrastructure, finance, and all of that, let's do some outlook and some projections as we move on, particularly with regards to infrastructure. What more should we expect in 60 seconds?
Yeah, look, the administration has tried as much as possible to drive private investment into infrastructure. If you look at the fund that allows for private sector to invest in roads and get a tax credit, you see that NLNG and Dangote have already taken that up. We continue to work with partners like the World Bank, AFDB, JICA to attract investment and grants and loans to do infrastructure. And then, like I said, we'll continue to protect critical, sensitive line items in the budget. But one thing you can be sure of is anything the administration is working on will be focused on impacting the segment of the population that is vulnerable and keeping as much of our critical infrastructure for the long term in play, even though we work to sanitize the budget to our current realities.
Very much, Ahmed Zakari, the Special Advisor to the President on Infrastructure. Thanks for your valuable contributions to Business Nigeria today.